Well, hello and welcome to the webinar. Apologies if you've registered for the previous version. I've been working on this now for a couple of months and intended to make them live so that people could come and watch online on LinkedIn and on YouTube at the same time. But I'm not exactly sure what I did. I must have made some kind of a technical mistake. So this stream at the moment isn't going to match the previous one that you've registered. I'm sorry. So hopefully people will be able to figure out what's going on. But if you missed the beginning of it, just let me know and I'd be happy to shoot you through a copy of the recording or maybe a set of the slides that we're going to cover as well. So today I'm going to be facilitating a bit of an online webinar about managing difficult and different personality types, especially in relation to workplace conflict. I'm sometimes drawn by phrases that Bill Eddy uses, like high conflict personalities, for example, and I think, awesome, a typology of people, and that would help me to figure out what's likely to resonate with them and what's likely to rub them up against, rub people up the wrong way. At the same time, when we look at applying some of the frameworks from communication schools or popular psychology types of approaches, they might not necessarily work with some people. And for me, one of the really helpful aspects of understanding workplace conflict is the differences that exist between people. So I'm going to be walking through some of the historical ways that we've analyzed and grouped different personality types together. I'm going to give an overview of the one that I particularly like, the Big Five personality profile. I'll explain what the categories are that fit in that, as well as some of the refinements and additions that have happened through the years. In particular, you can see on the slide there, the revised NEO personality inventory, the NEO PI. There's a few different versions of this NEO PI type of tool with sort of modernized and simplified language, etc. But the subcategories that exist within that tool for me are particularly helpful. Sure, it's useful to know whether I'm an extrovert and you're an introvert, and maybe we can navigate some of those differences. But within that category of extroversion, for example, the revised NEO personality inventory adds a number of different subdomains. Like, are you warm when I speak with you, or are you more cool and formal? Are you more gregarious? Do you like to be the life of the party? Or do you prefer withdrawing or hanging out with a small number of people at the same time? I think those types of differences in personality, if we can drill down to that higher level of detail, often provide us with a lot more opportunity for resolving or maybe even preventing conflict from coming up down the track. So finally, I'm going to be talking about how do we incorporate these personality types into the broader conflict toolkit that we're often working from. Now, if you don't know me, I'm a professional mediator. I'm the host of the Conflict Skills podcast, and I have an online self-access course on my website, The Essential Foundations for Managing Workplace Conflict. So this webinar, the recording of it, will effectively become a free resource for people who are registered for that course. And there I'm going to be also uploading this copy of the slides, and I've got a link for the self-assessment test if you'd like to go through something like that as well. If you're not registered for the course, I'd still be happy to send you through the PDFs for this one, and I can send you through a copy of that self-test link if that's something that appeals to you as well. So I think about workplace conflict in a reasonably nuanced kind of way in any situation. I can categorize people in this way, and that's going to be really helpful for me to figure out a flexible way of dealing with them. And that's true. It's truer though than you think. Like, each person is incredibly unique. So I do think that sometimes it can be helpful to generalize. It might give us a bit of a front foot when we're dealing with someone to know what kind of things are likely to resonate with them or which ones won't. But it's still at that unique individual layer that we often need to adjust and be flexible at the end of the day. So although we're talking about groups of people, and this group of people are likely like this other group of people is likely like that, each individual within the group is still going to have a very unique combination of personal factors. So we're going to evaluate some of those when we categorize people according to personality, but there's always going to be some element of that it's difficult to put your finger on. It's difficult to choose the right words to describe. And I think Carl Jung was getting at something similar when he gave the quote that you can see on the screen there. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. When you light a fire and bring it next to the gunpowder at the end of the match, it goes into a flame all of a sudden. And after that, the match isn't the same and the fire's not the same. Both of them have been affected by that chemical interaction. And we as humans are kind of a combination of different chemicals bubbling away in our systems at any one point of time as well. We've got our brain, organizing the secretion of different hormones, estrogen, testosterone, etc. We've got adrenaline, blood pressure, blood sugar, all of those different factors influencing our body. And our body then in turn influences the way that our brain works. Are we more likely to catastrophize? Are we more likely to rush and jump into something? Well, it would depend on how much coffee I've had and how much sleep I've had and whether I've just come from an argument with a different person that I work with before I end up talking to you. So even ourselves, we're not the same person day to day. And even in the afternoon versus the morning, you might get a different reaction from some people. So although I am saying these are some ways of categorizing people into groups, we never want to let go of that, I guess, fundamental understanding of the individual differences that make people so unique. Often if we can look at this person as a very unique individual, it's the kind of thing that resonates with them very strongly. So we change, we're a combination of all of these different chemicals as well as something else if you're not just a physicalist or a materialist. If you think that there's something else outside of our cells, then that's probably incorporated into our communication and conflict too. It's a very dynamic flow, isn't it? Relationships. There's the back and forth, the way that I position my hands, my facial expressions, my eye contact. You're going to interpret and read into that some message that you think that I was sending. And you interpret that according to your previous experiences, the context that you're working from, the other people in your life, the way that you've been brought up, the different norms and standards that you're used to. And I don't get to fully control how you interpret my behaviors. And then you interpret it however you do, you process it however you do, and then you respond. And I only catch a glimpse of your true intentions, the true factors that are the underlying reality that's at the heart of what you're actually wanting or what you're actually needing and what you're actually trying to say. So it's not just me and the person that I'm dealing with. We've got all of these contextual factors and pressures swirling around and influencing the people involved as well as the two individuals involved constantly changing and developing as they go through life themselves. It's this idea of neuroplasticity, that our brain still is morphed and shaped and responds to the environment that we're in, including the conflict, including the relationships, including physical health, all of those different layers too. So I've done a few different live webinars previously talking about the 5 types of conflict. Data conflict is the conflict about the facts. Like, wait a minute, that's not what I agreed to. That wasn't my understanding. That's not what I thought was going to happen. We could talk about the structure, like the way that we're interacting. Is it with other people in the room or a more private place? How much time have we got? All of those kind of elements. The interests, like what I want versus what you want. If we're in an organization and working together, I want to go home at 5 o'clock. I want to get paid as much as possible for the work that I'm doing. I want to have autonomy over my job role. It's those kind of elements. They're my interests, and then someone else will have a different set of interests. And then we often are negotiating or interacting around topics of value and relationship. Relationship is like getting fed up with each other. I didn't mean that. Stop misinterpreting me. You're trying to do the wrong, you're deliberately doing this because you don't care about this job, or you're deliberately doing this because you know that you're not going to have to be left with this mess to clean up. Someone else is going to have to clean it up after you. That's all the relationship conflict stuff. And then the value conflict is the big picture or small picture differences that we might have in our big picture values or small picture values. So it could be things like environmental sustainability is the one that I often talk about. But maybe in an organization, you might have a HR manager that really values people having a say. That's really important. So although there's a performance management process going on, they really want to make sure that they support the team members involved. Someone else on the executive team might think, look, I'm not their parent. I'm not there to hold their hand and hold the box of tissues for them. They need to stand on their own 2 feet at some stage. We just need to be honest and direct with people. That's the best way to work together. Well, you've got these 2 different perspectives, and it's not surprising that that sometimes contributes to value conflict. Or it could be the smaller things like, do you switch your camera on during a Zoom meeting, or is that rude or not to leave it off? What if you're 5 minutes late? Should you let your boss know that, or is that kind of acceptable? When you go and buy lunch, should you offer the other guys to get them something while you're out or not? It's these very subtle things that often exist as underlying expectations, and when they're met or not met, it often contributes to conflict. So, when there's conflict going on, I often think about these 5 different drivers because that can be a helpful tool of developing options for dealing with each in turn. Having said that, different personality types are going to want different things from you in terms of the way that that communication happens. Let's imagine that there's an issue existing within your team. 2 people are misreading their job descriptions, so they both think that they're responsible for the same task, or nobody wants to do this particular task because it's really uncomfortable or exhausting. That's interest conflict. Well, if you're dealing with someone who's very data focused, detail oriented, you could still clarify the data, the misunderstandings, if that's what's driving the conflict, but you would communicate in a different way. You would include all of that background information, give them more time to process it, allow them a right of reply, all of the things that a detail oriented, data focused person might look for. Someone else who's more of a happy go lucky kind of character, they really like keeping the team happy, that type of thing. We could still be dealing with data conflict, but we would do it in a way that's much more warm and supportive. Offer to take them out for a coffee and then talk them through the issues, for example. Someone in the fiery red kind of category, very driven, time poor, well, we might just not mince our words, cut to the chase with them, send them a dot point list of the summary of the issues rather than a massive wordy email that they're not likely to read. So we're still dealing with the same underlying factor, whether it's data or value or relationship or structure, etc. But the way that we do it and the way that the communication is likely to resonate with the other person is going to be different depending on the personality type that you're looking at. So we have to think carefully about our goal. What's important here in terms of the relationship for me? Like, I don't always take a perfectly unique way of communicating with every single person that's on my team. It's absurd. Sometimes it's just I'm communicating to you all like this by email, and that's the way that it's going to be. But if it's a really valuable team member and I know that there's been significant issues that they're dealing with recently, then it might make more sense for me to spend a bit more time, writing the email with them or spend more time talking it through with them, etc. Because I've got a different set of priorities that I'm dealing with at the moment. Whereas when I'm short-staffed and under the pump and I'm already stretched, I might just expect more flexibility from the other person, even though I acknowledge that there is this difference between our personality types. It would depend on your goal for the relationship. If this is a subcontractor that you're not likely to have much to do with after a few months, maybe you're just very assertive in the way that you deal with these personality differences. If it's your boss, a colleague that you're going to work with over the long haul, then maybe it makes more sense just to take more of a softly kind of approach, compromise or even collaborate as we go through how to navigate some of these differences. And then finally, it's the goal for others. Maybe the person that you're dealing with is a young apprentice or a new graduate or something similar. So you've noticed this personality difference with them, and you're wanting for them to develop an awareness of how this is contributing to the issues that they might be dealing with, for example. So this would all be a very case-by-case kind of thing. What's important for me? What do I want for the relationship? And what do I want for the other people involved? So as we go through the different options of thinking about how personality can be incorporated into the way that you're interacting with the individuals that you're dealing with, we also don't want to lose sight of those bigger picture goals and priorities. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that it's not necessarily your job to keep everybody happy. So even though we notice some differences in personality, you'll still need to decide how flexible you are, how accommodating you are, versus where you just choose to stick to your guns and stick to your boundaries. So there are many different ways of categorizing personality. I can remember when I was studying my psych degree, a few of these were there back then, and some of them are relatively new. Since, I don't know, like the year 300 or something like that, these original categories existed: phlegmatic, sanguine, choleric, etc. I thought originally that they were connected to Carl Jung, but I don't think they are. I think they were from way back with Hippocrates or one of those very early philosophers. I don't know if you're watching this and you happen to know the source of that, let me know in the comments. Some common ones these days in modern workplaces, though, that I've come across is the DISC model, D-I-S-C, the dominant, influential, stable, and conscientious people that we might deal with. That's a pretty good tool. It's specific to workplaces, reasonably practical. It's somewhat difficult, though, to find free self-assessment tools for it. So some of these different personality inventories is written by a particular person and then they copyright it. So you have to pay if you want to use the sort of formal version of the test. There's a really good book I like, Surrounded by Idiots, where he talks about the DISC model using colors instead, but it's the same kind of categories. Then we've got the Insights Discovery model. I'll show you more about that in a moment. The old Enneagram kind of models is another one that you might come across. The Jungian personality types actually underlie some of the work that was done in Myers-Briggs, I believe. And then you've got the Myers-Briggs type indicator. That's another really popular one. Introverted, extroverted thinking or feeling, etc. My wife really loves that one, and a few people have come across in professional contexts also find it incredibly useful. It's not as well backed up in the research, though, as you might expect. And then, of course, we've got other less backed up in the research options, like astrological star signs that people might be. Oh, they're a Scorpio, you know how they are. And in Korea, in South Korea, they often focus on blood types and the connection between personality, which is really interesting. I spent a couple of years over in Korea teaching English, and people would often ask me, what's my blood type? And they would always ask you how old you are. Like, how old are you? And they're often figuring out who's older and who's younger, because you have to pay particular deferential respect to people who are older than you or more senior than you in a company or something similar. So there's different ways of categorizing personality. Some of them are more scientific and some of them less so. Even the DISC model, the Insights Discovery and Myers-Briggs, though, they're not as... So in statistics and these types of models, we might talk about reliability and validity. So that's indicating things like, could we take a different group of people and then apply the same tool? And some of those ones are reasonably culturally specific, not necessarily cross-cultural. Now, my favorite one is what's called the Big Five personality factors, and I'm going to talk about that one in a moment. But let me just give you a quick look through of what some of these different popular ones look like. So on the screen here, we've got the DISC model. You can see it's dominance, influential, consciousness, and steadiness. Here we're focused on workplace behavior specifically, and most people tend to be mainly one category, or some people are a combination of one and then two. So you might be a high influence person and a low dominance or something similar. So you'd find that the dominant people, they're very direct, cut to the chase, call it like they see it kind of people. They come across as a bit forceful, sometimes a bit pushy. And they're the kind of people that you might want to be a bit more assertive with earlier on. If it's your boss, you could just be accommodating because it makes sense in a career limiting kind of way. But if it's a colleague, you might need to stick to your guns and just make sure that it's give and take early on. You might come across people in the influential category. They really love talking. I think I would put myself in this category. So when there's a problem going on, you would deal with dominant people or influential people differently. With dominant people, you might say, here's an update. Here's where things are up to. What should we do next? Or this is what we're thinking. Let me know if there's any problems. But with the influential person, you might say, this is what we've done so far. This is where things are up to. We wanted to get your perspective at this stage before we make any other decisions. Like they want to have a say in things that affect them. They want to have their ego massaged a little bit and for their viewpoints to be acknowledged and valued. But conscientious people and steadiness people, they're a little bit different. Conscientious people will buy the book. They want to make sure that they do things correctly. They've got that real ability to focus on the data and the high level of details, but they're not as direct, and they might find the dominant kind of people a bit disrespectful or sometimes cold or not supportive, to say the least. And then we've got the steady people that just want consistency and stability, etc. I don't mind it. I find it somewhat useful when we think about workplace conflict kind of situations. But what I've noticed is that conflict brings out a different side of people than they might have expected. Even an accountant, finance kind of person that might be in the conscientious category, they might all of a sudden become very fiery when they've been accused of something that isn't true, for example. So I don't know about the consistency over time and consistency over different types of experience that people go through. I think, in my opinion, it's pretty accurate when we're kind of in control, we're calm and logical and we're managing our emotions okay. But as things go off the rails and people begin to spiral, I think that different elements of their personality often show up. Like an influenced person that really likes discussion previously might all of a sudden become very legalistic and they're going back to the job contract or the Australian standards for what's a defect and what's not, or whatever else it might be. This is what the Enneagram looks like, the different categories. You can see this is how this breaks people apart into the 9 different areas there, looking at the common factors of fear, shame, and anger, and which ones the person tends to pay particular attention to and sort of navigate around more deliberately than the other two. This is the insights discovery model, similar to DISC in a lot of ways, but it breaks people out into the colors. So you've got the fiery red, the sunshine yellow, the earth green, and the cool blue. And immediately you can see a bit of overlap, right? Like the blues look a lot like if I go back, either the conscious or the steadiness kind of people. Probably you put the blue in the conscientious kind of category. And then in the green, the earth green, we've got the steady kind of people. So the reds are the driven data folk, like we just need to get things moving. Let's keep things logical, rational. Like we might as well make a decision and we can adjust as we go. The yellows really like the discussion and being creative and coming up with an original way of doing something. The greens are like the glue that holds the team together, the people that want to hang out after work and have beers. They want to go away camping on the weekends. It's those kind of personalities. They often find conflict very uncomfortable and quite overwhelming. And then you've got the blues, often the finance people or HR administration kind of stuff, really looking at a large number of moving pieces and wanting all of the information. So these different aspects of our personality or different types of people that you would come across are going to want different things from you and want to do different things in terms of dealing with conflict. I like this particular model because you can sort of keep it at that simple level of the 4 colors, or there's ways of thinking about it where you can break it apart into these other more refined elements. If you're curious to know a bit more about DISC, the Enneagrams, or this Insights Discovery one, if you're registered in the course already, you can see the links down below. If you're not registered and you would like a bit more info, just shoot me a DM and I'll be able to fix you up with a bit of additional information there. You can see the way that this Insights Discovery has been applied quite differently, like the red on a good day versus the red on a bad day. On a good day, they can be very pragmatic, proactive, focused, determined. On a bad day, that might come across as aggressive, controlling, micromanaging, rash, all of those kind of areas. So I like this as a way of maybe developing a bit of awareness as to what your personality type might be. Oh, I thought that I would be more in the red category, but looking at this, I actually realized that I'm more in the yellow. I prefer to have input, even though I'm not necessarily needing to be in control of the final decision. Or I do want that high level of detail. And actually, I'm realizing that when I don't have that, that contributes to me escalating or something similar. So the self-realization aspect of it can be useful, but you might also identify, oh, this person I work with would definitely be in the green category or the yellow or the red or the blue. And so we can begin to take a flexible approach, even with not a whole lot of underlying knowledge about how they came up with these models and are they accurate or not and in which circumstances, etc. I often think about all of the different aspects of research and science that underlie psychology as it's useful, but what we're really looking for is functional definitions. Like, how do things work in practice? So for me, some of these personality tools that I've gone through already can be quite useful for that. Now, another really common one is the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator, I think it is, the MBTI. So the extroversion or introversion is one axis that you would be ranked on. Sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, judging versus perceiving. So introverted, extrovert, how do you get your energy? Do you find being in a crowd really stimulating and enjoyable, or is it very draining and exhausting and you just want to retreat and be by yourself? Sensing or intuition, how do you take on information? Is it like in this very structured, logical kind of way, or more of an overall vibe or an overall take on something? Thinking or feeling, how do you come to conclusions? What do you base your decisions on? And then the final one is that judging versus perceiving, sort of the underlying way that we interpret the information coming in. So that can be quite useful for people, but the challenge is that there's a large number of these types, and I haven't come across anyone that's able to memorize all of them. Usually when people do training in these kind of workshops, you get really excited and you look at it type of thing and they think, finally, this explains everything I've been dealing with. Now I know how to communicate with Gerald or something. But Gerald might not agree that they're an ENFP. They might think of themselves as an ESFP or something similar, and a completely different approach would be warranted. So for me, I tend to find this one a little bit overly prescriptive, and I'm not 100% sure about the validity in terms of actually acting on these assumptions. But again, I've known a number of different people that really like that Myers-Briggs personality type indicator. Like I said, my wife really likes it. It's certainly helped her for the self-understanding aspect of how she deals with leadership and other aspects of her work. So if that's something that you think might resonate with you, that would be another one to consider looking into. So I just wanted to give a bit of an overview to explain that there are many different ways of thinking about personality, and I haven't even begun to brush the surface of all of the different models that exist. All of them have different research programs and research studies that have been done about them, but I'm going to say that almost all of them have less empirical basis than you would expect, except for this one. The Ocean or the Big Five model is the one that I tend to use these days when I'm doing workplace conflict and I'm wanting to explain to people what kinds of personalities differences could exist between the two of you and what kind of options can be helpful for navigating or managing some of those. Once we notice the difference, I'm not necessarily saying you should do this, but at least I can be confident that the categories that we're looking at in this Big Five model are accurate to some extent. So this, like a number of the other personality models, was originally developed through lexical analysis. They looked at the words that people were using to describe themselves and broke it apart into different categories using what's called factor analysis. So they've come up with these categories: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, because they're the ones that don't overlap with each other the most. They're independent. So if someone's quite extroverted, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be highly agreeable or low in agreeableness. All of them operate largely independently. It's reasonably accurate cross-culturally, which really appeals to me as well. It's something that tends to be quite stable for people in and outside of work. And it's the kind of thing that might not necessarily even change over time for some individuals. It could change. You might become more open or less open. You prefer routine and stability as you get older. But it's probably not going to take a full 180. Whereas some of the other aspects, like the thinking, feeling kind of thing, I can imagine sometimes oscillating between both ends of the spectrum there. Whereas looking at the mess that I often leave on the floor, even of my office, as I'm gazing across my office, I realize that I'm very low in conscientiousness. And that's been something that's probably affected me right through schooling, etc. So it's not an excuse. It doesn't mean that I get to then just dismiss all of the behaviors that I do and the negative consequences of the way that I might interact with others. That's not true. I'm still responsible for picking up after myself, even though I'm low in conscientiousness, but it can be helpful for defining what your defaults are likely to be. What's your resting state likely to be in terms of these aspects? And when you're dealing with situations that are the opposite, like you're a very introverted kind of person and you're needing to like socialize, mingle, or manage a workplace mediation and warm up to clients who are stressed out of their mind or whatever else it might be, it also helps you to understand what you might need to do for self-care and looking after yourself in the long run as well. So we've got these 5 different categories that the Big Five talks about. Openness is things like, do you prefer routine, practical kind of stuff, or more imaginative, spontaneous decisions and behaviors? Conscientiousness is talking about things like impulsivity, organization. Are you impulsive and disorganized or more disciplined and careful? Often you can look at whether people have messy desks or not to get a bit of an early indication about that one. Are you extroverted? This one's similar to the previous models that we talked about. Are you reserved and thoughtful versus sociable and fun-loving? With agreeableness, you could be high in this or low. High people would be more trusting, more helpful, happier to go with the flow. Low agreeable people might be more suspicious, more uncooperative, etc. And then we've got neuroticism. In some of the very new models coming out, this seems to be often relabeled as emotionality or emotionalness or something similar. So you could think about it in that way if you like. They experience very strong emotions. But low neuroticism kind of people are very stable, very calm. They can take challenges in their stride. Even when they're dealing with conflict and difficult conversations, it really doesn't worry them that much. People high in neuroticism, they ruminate and re-experience the conversations that they've just been in. They worry about conversations that's coming up, etc. So when it comes to workplace conflict, you'll often see some of these differences in openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, etc., beginning to play out. Someone who's more introverted would send an email. They might be a very conscientious kind of person, so they're trying to remind someone else about 3 tasks that need to be done. The person who they're writing to might be really high in neuroticism, so they feel like they're being criticized, and they're very extroverted, so they burst into the other person's office, demanding to talk to them right now. Like, you'd see this playing out in day-to-day life in a very, I think, observable kind of way in some of the interactions that you're dealing with. So a little bit more information, a different way of thinking about it. You could think that the highly neurotic kind of people have that prone for depression, emotional liability, shamelessness as well, potentially could be another aspect. The low neuroticism people, more fearless, more shamelessness. Neuroticism would be shameful, feeling shame. Extroversion, excitement seeking, attention seeking. Low extroversion, it's socially withdrawing, isolating, detached, coldness. Openness, you might see things like magical thinking, eccentricity, inflexibleness, etc. when that's low. For agreeableness, it could be submissiveness, selflessness, guilt ability when someone's high. They often get guilt tripped by things like that's making me uncomfortable or something like that. I'm sorry, I should change then. Whereas if you're talking to someone who's very low in agreeableness, it's like, well, they're going to probably do it more and more once they realize that it's getting under your skin. So are they likely to manipulate or deceive or effectively just refuse what you're asking them to do? And then conscientiousness, we've got perfectionism and workaholism when it's very high, but down the bottom, we've got distractibility, missing deadlines, rashness, irresponsibility, those kind of elements. So let's have a look at some of these different categories in a little bit more detail. And I've just prepared a few notes that I'm going to read from for each of the different areas. So I think openness is often a really helpful way of starting to think about this. The starting point for a lot of people when it comes to personality is extroversion. I don't know why. It just seems to be the one that they often talk about first. Maybe it was on the Myers-Briggs one first or something similar. But like extroversion and introversion, that's useful. It tells me like what's going to exhaust you and drain you versus what's going to come more naturally to you. But it doesn't really give me much information about what I should talk to you about, how I should bring up this issue that I'm upset about, or what's likely to resonate with you and come across as appropriate feedback as opposed to criticism or micromanagement or something else. Whereas openness, I think, is actually very accurate for that. I'm sorry, I can see a typo that I've left. You can see my conscientiousness, it being low in practice, can't you? So high openness people are usually curious. Family groups, you might have siblings and some of them are more open than others, or one of your parents might be more open than others. They really want to stick to their routine. Someone else might really like experimenting with new recipes, smaller things or big things, like let's take a completely different type of vacation this year. So you've got these people that are very high in openness, and at work, they're often perceived as being quite creative and artistic kind of people. They prefer variety, they value things like independence, they're curious about their surroundings, and they often enjoy traveling or learning new things. So one of the things that can be really useful though is thinking about openness in terms of the actual subdomains that go into it as well. So we'll turn to that next level of detail in a few moments. So for you, if you're thinking about, well, where would I factor into this openness scale? Of the broad areas that you would consider, you'll see in a few moments, I've got a link if you'd like to do a self-assessment tool on this. But even just thinking about those questions at a reasonably high level, what jumps out at you? How would this mean then that you prefer to negotiate arrangements with other people in your life, like your family or your partner? What kind of a parent would you likely to be, given that that's the thing that you value, that's the approach that you tend to take? How would other people who are different to you in openness experience you? It really was very helpful for me normalizing some of the differences that exist in relationships, understanding the concept of openness, because I sometimes find closed people very annoying. I'm very high in openness myself. So when I go and stay with family members and they always have a cup of tea at this time and they always go to this restaurant to eat dinner and they always blah, 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 blah. It's like they literally always do almost everything the same. Whereas I'm like, come on, let's do something different. It's sunny outside. Let's go to a different place. Like we've been to that restaurant. We know what it's like. It's pretty good, but wouldn't it be nice and exciting to try something new? Or at work, I've often showed up in work roles and my boss says, this is the way that we do it. And I very often said, no worries. Would it be okay if I come up with a way of tweaking that? Let me have a think about that. There might be a different way of approaching it, etc. I really like coming up with a different way of doing something, even if I'm honest, when there's already a pretty good existing solution that's there. But that's going to be different to you. So how would this level of openness and where you would rank yourself, so to speak, factor into the way that you relate to other people? So the next compare themselves to other people at similar stages of their career, for example, they tend also to be naturally self-disciplined and quite considerate. There's a number of different companies that use this Big Five personality assessment as part of their recruitment process as they're selecting appropriate staff for different roles that they're looking for. And conscientiousness is one of the ones that is highly correlated with a high level of job performance, even more than intelligence, which is interesting. So you don't necessarily need people that are highly switched on or they already know all of the information. A lot of people say that you can teach people the book smarts. What you need is the heart. What you need is the right attitude. What you need is that I'm not going to quit and leave other people to clean up after me type of approach that highly conscientious people would often bring. And you can easily imagine, can't you, if we think about workplace conflict, if someone's naturally prone to being undisciplined, how that might be perceived by the other people around them. That might be categorized as something that's unsafe, for example. And so all of a sudden, you've got people that feel like you're not doing the right thing. You're not ticking all of the boxes that we need to tick. So sometimes it's preparing ahead of time how people who are relatively low in this conscientious dimension are still going to be able to do the thing that they're meant to do. For me, I'm very much prone to procrastination myself, if I'm honest, and I really need to have a structure in place that lets me perform because I know that if it's just left to my whims, well, to be frank, it's probably not likely that I'm going to stick to the task that I'm meant to be doing for very long in any case. So we've gone through openness and conscientiousness. How organized do you keep your living and working spaces? Even just look right now, how would other people describe that? How would other people describe the type of person that sits at this desk? And how easily can you resist temptations or distractions when you're focusing on a new task? This again is a reasonably high level overview, and I've got the self-assessment tool that I can send you a link shortly. But just at a high level, what jumps out at you? The next category that we could consider is agreeableness. for other people rather than taking more than their fair share, etc. They tend to be more compliant, also potentially more honest, maybe more sympathetic and more empathetic. Show without almost crying because of what the characters on the screen are going through, but they're not compliant. They cut corners in terms of paperwork that they're doing at work. So there's a bit of nuance that's involved. Now, part of the challenge with this particular category of agreeableness, I think, is that some of them sound negative, like introversion, extroversion, thinking or feeling. In Myers-Briggs, they're all kind of neutral, one or the other, but we're on the spectrum. Whereas for the big 5 personality factors, some of them seem more negative. Why would you hire someone that's not very agreeable? And what about neuroticism? Why would you hire someone that's always worried and always stressed and constantly feeling like they're at the end of their tether? Well, these different personality types do bring unique benefits. Like somebody who's reasonably low level in agreeableness, they might be really good at managing performance management processes with staff because they don't get pushed around, or they don't give clients discounts. They've got a very firm manner, and that might be something that clients actually really respect in the long run, as long as they're highly competent and they're following through with the promises that they're making. For example, you might come across someone who's very insulting. They're rude to the other people that they work with. Well, if you say to them, why are you being so insulting? Or could you please stop being insulting? Probably just going to say, I'm not. What are you talking about? I'm not insulting. They're too sensitive. Get over it, precious princess, or whatever the thing is that they decide to respond as a rebuttal. So part of that, I think, is because it's come across as criticism with that negative connotation, insulting others. Why are you being so offensive? Why are you being so sexist? Why are you being so racist? I think probably what is more effective is normalizing the two perspectives. It sounds like for you, you're reasonably direct. You call it how you see it. You know, we always know where we stand with you. And as you've said, that's something that effectively is quite helpful for people around you because they do find you very transparent. On the other hand, there are other people on the team who have a different perspective. They really value things like harmony. They want to feel like you're all in it together. So when there's conflict going on and they experience that very direct communication from you, it might come across as insulting, even though that's not your intention. So we're normalizing the fact that this is going to happen. We're talking as objectively as we can about the thing that they've actually done. And we're not saying necessarily that it's obvious that you're a jerk or it's obvious that you're an idiot. So we don't say, as I've told you before, as you already know. That kind of stuff obviously comes across as a little bit belittling and adversarial. And then that whole like, what's wrong with you? Are you heartless? Are you careless? Don't you care? Why would you want to hurt other people? I don't find that to be as helpful as saying, I'm sure this isn't your intention. Others that you're dealing with. Whoops, I think I muted my mic there for a moment. So hopefully you can hear me again. Let's have a look at some of the reflection questions for agreeableness. So you might ask yourself things like, how easily do I trust others? Do I quickly give people the benefit of the doubt or not? How important is it for me to avoid conflict? Do I feel like keeping people happy is something that's a really high priority? Is it easy to empathize with other people's emotions and perspectives, or do I find them all a little bit confusing and a bit disjointed? And how often do I put other people's needs before my own? I think the very high agreeableness people, well, everyone around them loves them because they're always doing what other people like. They're keeping everybody else happy. The downside to that often is that they end up paying the price for that. They stay back at work late fixing things. They take on board responsibility for an issue which ultimately they don't have enough control over to fix, for example. So the next category is extroversion, and I think this is probably one that makes sense at a surface level. Highly extroverted people, more likely to be social, energized by social interactions, excitement seeking, happy to be the center of attention, etc., and quite outgoing. Whereas by comparison, we've got low extroversion people, happy in solitude and almost seeking solitude in some situations, fatigued, drained, however you would describe that, by too much social interaction, reflective, they often like to give things thought before they venture a view on an issue, for example, potentially uncomfortable being the center of attention and quite reserved. And again, you can see there's real differences in the aspects that are talked about here, right? Like whether or not I find being in groups draining, that's different to whether or not I mind standing up and giving a presentation in front of the rest of my team. So I might be a medium kind of extroversion person, but one of those things I find very difficult and the other comes more naturally, or vice versa. Or I might kind of be lukewarm in all of the different elements that we're looking at here. So to consider this, you might ask yourself questions like, do I feel energized or drained after spending time in those large groups? How comfortable am I being the center of attention? And if you're not comfortable, how come? Are you thinking about what other people think about you? Are you thinking about what other people are feeling? Are you thinking about whether or not you've done something wrong and made a mistake or missed something and people are judging you? There'll be different elements that jar us or rub us the wrong way about that experience of everybody paying attention to us. And again, sometimes going to that layer deeper, peeling the onion a little bit, helps us to develop a much deeper level of self-awareness. And then finally, we've got neuroticism. As I said, sometimes this is classified as emotionality in some of the newer profile types that are coming out, but neuroticism is the original one that was categorized as Big Five. So highly neurotic people are usually more anxious. They might be hostile or irritable, quick to react when they're provoked, that kind of thing. Very stressed, self-conscious, vulnerable, and experiencing dramatic shifts in mood. Low neurotic people are usually more laid back, more calm, more stable emotionally, more confident, resilient, rarely sad or depressed. You can sort of see it's talking about, again, a number of different categories there and even different time frames. What do you think is the difference between a feeling and an emotion? I don't know about you, but a lot of people don't know the difference between the two. And in fact, they might use the terms interchangeably. And then what about mood? Someone who's very moody, someone who's very volatile, someone who overthinks things. There might be different aspects of that high neuroticism characteristic in terms of the way that it plays out and impacts on your actual life, as well as the relationships that you're wanting to improve. So you could ask yourself questions like, how often do we worry that things might go wrong? How easily do you bounce back from setbacks or disappointments? Do you tend to dwell on more negative experiences or let them go quickly? And how confident do you feel in your ability to handle life's challenges? So if I flick back to that original slide with the ocean categories in it, so that we've got them on our screen. Oops, there we go. So where would you put yourself right now, in a score out of 10, where would you rank your openness, your conscientiousness, your extroversion, your agreeableness, and your neuroticism? And then for some of the key people that you work with, your boss, your key staff member, if you've got a particular leading hand or something, are they similar to you or different? How do those differences play out in terms of the culture that gets created? Is it one way or the other? And where are the particular sticking points or issues where you might rub each other the wrong way? So that was the original Big Five. That was when I studied my psych degree. This was the model that I can remember learning back then. And I've used that for the last 20 years or so since I finished my study in a whole bunch of different practical settings. So I'm just going to flick forward a little bit though to show, I think the real power of this Big Five model really comes about when we look at the subcategories. Sometimes these are called facets. I really like that metaphor, like the facet of a diamond or a valuable jewel. You know, all of the little sides that are in these gems, the facets that are there. It's a very complex shape, a tiny little diamond, when we can zoom in and look at it. And I think personality is a little bit like that as well. We can make out the overall shape. I'm a bit more extroverted or a bit more agreeable, But a lot of the benefit comes when we look at the nuance and the detail that might be involved. So if we think about, I have to make it a bit larger on my screen so I can see it a bit better. If we think about neuroticism, for example, there's going to be different aspects of that that are higher or lower in different individuals. You might be someone who really experiences a lot of anxiety. So walking in the door at work, your heart might be racing. The first time you're meeting a new client, when you go out to say hello and introduce yourself, that might feel really overwhelming in the moment. But other people who are high in neuroticism wouldn't experience that level of anxiety. They experience more the hostility side of things, sudden anger, sudden escalation. I rank reasonably highly in that myself. Like if my son says to me, "Dad, I can't find the cup for the dog food," like I'll immediately get angry about that. Well, for goodness sakes, mate, you're the one that would have put it back. Where did you leave it? And as soon as those kind of words come out of my mouth, I often immediately regret it. Why was I speaking so harshly? To be honest, it's often about the buildup of stress or some other type of conflict that I'm dealing with behind the scenes anyway. But I'm high in that likely to become hostile, to become antagonistic or respond to antagonism. Some people in the neurotic category, they're really high in depression. Other people might be really high in self-consciousness. They're constantly worrying about what other people think about them. They find the potential chance of gossip or back channeling and other people talking about them behind their back immensely insulting and incredibly confronting. So that might be the kind of situation where they really need to go and put the other person in their place or let them know what might be going on. Higher or lower in impulsiveness, and then higher or lower in the vulnerability to stress. In extroversion, we can see the following facets or categories, subcategories. Warmth, like how kind am I, how friendly at the surface level. Gregariousness, do I like being the life of the party, those big social gatherings. Assertiveness, am I more likely to be direct and stick to my guns? Even those three, they're very different facets of extroversion, aren't they? And this is where, at least for me, I begin to see a whole lot of benefit to these kind of tools because I can calibrate my expectations. This experience is likely to be more confronting for me, whereas this one, it's going to be easier. So I need to do some things to prepare to look after myself before, during, and after the harder ones. And hopefully that's going to remove some of that potential for coming across as overly hostile or overly antagonistic or whatever else it might be. Excitement seeking, positive. You can see it's just so interesting, isn't it? Looking at these different subcategories. When we think about the category of openness, are they the kind of person with a really vivid imagination? Do they really value aesthetics and beauty and sound and nice smells or nice feelings or whatever? Are they accurate at understanding other people's emotions? Maybe they're really good at managing their own emotions. That could be an example of the openness. Maybe they're really adventurous. They love exploring. They love excitement. Maybe they love debates. They love intellectual ideas and they're really curious about new things that they don't know much about. Or maybe they've got really strong values, like they don't want to cause harm to other people, or they really believe in self-determination or something similar. Again, when we're dealing with openness, and that might be an area where I am different from other people, we could talk about each of these facets and negotiate around those individually. Like maybe I could say to them, I really appreciate that you've got such an active imagination. Actually, I think your creative problem solving might come in handy for a couple of the issues that we're dealing with later. Right now, though, all we need to do is to come up with a relatively simple set of steps that we're going to take. So could we think about the things in that order? So I'm kind of saying I acknowledge that there's this difference between us, but let's see if we can figure out a way of managing this. So saying you're very open, I don't think that's going to be as accurate as saying, I really appreciate your focus on aesthetics and the way that you can often make the space that we're in feel a lot more comfortable, regardless of the agenda format that we're using or the structure for the meeting or whatever else it might be. In agreeableness, we've got the facets of trust, straightforwardness, altruism, compliance, modesty. And then in conscientiousness, we've got competence, order, dutifulness, etc. So I really have appreciated understanding these sub-facets as well as the broader big first 5 personality tools. I don't know how that resonates with you. If you would like to go and do a self-assessment, there's a 120 question test that I've got a link here. And if you don't have a copy of the slides in front of you, I can send it to you afterwards. So it's 120 questions. It takes about 15 minutes to do it. But afterwards, you end up with this really cool report that it spits out in terms of managing these unique different aspects. So I'll just see if I can flick to that in a moment. Got it in a different section. I couldn't figure out how to get it on the slides, unfortunately. So hopefully that's coming across on your screen, although you're not going to be able to see me at the same time. So what you're looking at is my results. I put my name in just as S, and so this is the kind of response that it gives you. A really good overview of extroversion, including the categories, what it's likely to look like in terms of behaviors, etc. And then it evaluates you according to the different subdomains. So you can see for me in extroversion, I'm really cheerful. I try to be kind of a jovial kind of person. I like to talk to new members of my team to make them feel comfortable, that kind of thing. But I really don't like staying in crowds. So you can see by difference there, like my level of gregariousness, like being the life of the party, I'm just not into it. It's not something that I'm interested in. So for me, that could be quite a helpful way of negotiating this difference. Let's imagine that my wife really wants to go out for dinner, whereas I'm not the kind of person that enjoys that, which I'm not. Well, I need to decide how I'm going to respond. And I suppose that's where we do the full circle back to those initial goals that I talked about earlier. If I'm really tired after an incredibly hard day at work and my wife wants to go out for dinner and I'm low in gregariousness, so that's not likely something I'm going to want to do, in some situations I just say no. I compete. I take that dictating approach. I stick to my guns. I hold on to my boundaries. I know there's this difference between us. That's the kind of thing that you really like. And you're right, we haven't done it for ages. Tonight, I'm just not up to it. Would you mind if we do it a different time? It doesn't mean we need to be aggressive or rude or harsh or whatever, but we take that competing kind of approach. In other situations, it might make sense to take more of an accommodating kind of approach. Just go with the flow. I'm a bit tired, I'm low in gregariousness, so I probably don't feel like going out for dinner. But I mean, to be frank, that's not going to change. So maybe it's better just to bite the bullet and go out and spend a couple of hours doing something that's slightly less fun than I expect it will be. I mean, the reality is that once we get to the restaurant, it's probably going to be great and I'll have a great time anyway. But right now, I've got the pessimistic grey cloud sitting over my head. And in some situations, it makes sense just to be accommodating. We could compromise. I'm happy to go out for dinner, but could we just go to the pub up the road instead of the fancy place? Or sometimes we just avoid it. We don't bother talking back to the person who's making the request. I think if your partner wants to go out for dinner with you, that's probably not the best option, but I suppose you do have the choice of just not getting back to them. And then sometimes it makes sense to go through and collaborate, but not always. When we talk about collaborating in conflict, it means we sit down and go through options and see if we can come up with an arrangement that is actually a win-win for everyone. So that's not always possible, and it's not always worth it. And in reality, it might make things a lot worse in the meantime. Like if your wife says, I'd really like to go out for dinner, and you think about collaborating, you might say to her, well, no worries. Look, I'm happy to go out for dinner too, but we've got these two other things on the weekend, so maybe we could reschedule one of them, or maybe you could help me out with the cooking for this other thing that I've got to prepare for, or whatever else it might be. So we could sit down and go through options and come up with a win-win. But in the meantime, my wife's saying, yeah, but are we going out for dinner or not? I need to make the reservation now if we're going to. So compromise by comparison, at least you get to a quick decision. It's kind of splitting the difference. I am happy to go, but could we not travel far? Or could we go a bit later? Or could we make sure we get home early? Or could we invite this person? Or whatever the thing is that you're hoping for a bit of give and take in. So when I talk about these conflict modes, anytime in conflict workshops, it's not that there's a right and wrong. This is the best way to deal with conflict. Depending on the situation that you're dealing with, all 5 of these options might make strategic sense. So if we go back to some of those sub-facets, the sub-categories of personality, I think what we need to effectively do is to decide, when does it make sense to stick to our guns? If we go down to agreeableness, for example, like I'm very low in a number of them actually, like cooperation, I'm very low in. And if I had a manager who was aware of this, they might talk with me about it. Like I know in my career, it has actually caused me a number of different problems. I can remember a huge argument that I got in my first job as a manager. We had the finance department who would always be harassing us for the credit card statements. They wanted all of the documentation to submit into their accounting software. And at the beginning, I took this so personally. I was like, look, I've got things that I'm focused on. I'm an operations manager. I've got 30 staff under me. I'm dealing with crisis situations here. Like, get off my back. Whereas in hindsight, I knew that that was going to be something that probably was going to rub me up the wrong way. So I could have asked for some support from one of my team members to get the paperwork done, or I could have scheduled time in my diary the day before to make sure that I got it done, etc. This is an example where the difference, if it's not managed, can really manifest in conflict, the strong negative emotions and the problems with workplace interactions that we're all familiar with. But naming the difference, this is likely to be an issue, or this is the way that we work, that's probably different to how you worked previously. What's going to be helpful for you to adjust to this? That kind of conversation would have been incredibly helpful for me. So effectively, that HR manager should have decided, well, what's going to be the best way of dealing with Simon here? We know he's a low compliance kind of person. Maybe we are just very firm with him, but we don't want to set him up off and making him go all defensive or whatever. So maybe we just send a very clear, short email. These are the 3 steps that's needed. Is there anything that we can do to support you in this? Would you like us to come and give you reminders? Would you like us to set up a calendar recurring event in your diary or something similar? What's going to be helpful for you getting this paperwork together? Because it is something that needs to be submitted on the 30th of every month. So they might have just decided to be very firm, and outlining some of those personality differences is potentially the reason why this is happening, but then also saying this needs to change, this can't continue moving forward. That might have been an effective way of them competing with me back then. They might have compromised and said, well, if you can't get all the paperwork, could you at least get these 3 things to us today? We can hold off for another week on the rest of them. They could have taken an accommodating kind of approach and just said, no worries, Simon, we can get this information from the online banking system that we've got. That's fine. We'll sort something out. They might have avoided it, maybe just not responded to me and instead probably gone to talk to my boss about it or taken a different kind of approach. Maybe it's not such a big deal though, and the conflict that you're dealing with and the difference in personality might not actually need a particular intervention to be in place. And then when would it make sense to collaborate? No worries, Simon. Look, you're under the pump at the moment. I get where you're coming from being an on-site operations manager. At the same time, the challenge for us is that we need this documentation as part of our funding requirements or something similar. What's going to work moving forward to make sure that these delays aren't encountered next time round? So it's just respectfully observing the difference. You're a bit like this and I'm a bit like this. How are we going to figure this out? And I think essentially that's what we can do when it comes to all of those different aspects of the big 5 personality profiles. If someone is a little bit more focused on excitement seeking than you are, for example, we would normalize that. I get where you're coming from. It seems like for you, this is the kind of activity that resonates with you. On my end, it's a little bit more like this. So we're naming those 2 different perspectives, both being as potentially valid. It's not saying you're wrong or what you need to understand is this, etc. It's just saying we've got different approaches here, different types of personality ultimately. So how are we going to figure this out? Because the last thing I want is that we lose the connection between us or this creates a rift that's unable to be recovered or something else moving forward. But what do you think? How does that resonate with you, thinking about personality in such a multifaceted kind of approach? Do you find that to be a little bit overly complicated? And maybe for you, just the broader ocean categories was more helpful? I suppose this is going to be an area where there's a little bit of individual difference in terms of what resonates with different people. And then how you decide to use this, you would need to consider how deliberate or structured or direct you want to be. I know for a number of managers, they incorporate this into their thinking and communication, but they don't necessarily discuss the sub-facets explicitly, for example. Like they wouldn't say, you've got a really strong imagination, even though that's what they're thinking in terms of the way that they're dealing with the staff member. For other people, though, they do it very directly. They might ask their staff to do a self-assessment and then discuss the results in terms of what it would mean working together as a team moving forward or something similar. I suppose that would be up to you as to what you think is appropriate given your situation that you're in. But how have you found this approach? How do you find this way of doing the webinars with the different slides, etc.? Has it been useful? I'd love to know what resonated with you. If you've got a moment to maybe put a comment down below. If you're watching on a platform where you've got the option of commenting, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff's obviously incredibly useful as well. For me, once I think about the different aspects of people's personality, it really reinforces the importance of treating people like individuals, not assuming that we know everything that's going on in somebody else's head, not assuming that everybody thinks the way that we do. They certainly don't. And I love those 4 aspects from the positive parenting program: bigger, calmer, kinder, and wiser. Whatever the differences are that exist between me and this other person, how can I be the bigger, calmer, kinder, and wiser person in this particular situation? Any thoughts, questions, ideas for a future similar webinar that you'd like me to put together? Let me know. You can shoot me an email, simon@simongood, or otherwise leave a comment down below. But thank you very much for listening. I hope that it's been useful. Bye for now.